Welcome to the next video in my scripting tutorial series. In the last video, we took a look at while loops. In this video, we're going to take a look at the next type of loop, which is for loop. So if we drag one of those into our script, this is what a for loop node looks like. It has a control variable, which will explain what that is, of course, in a second, and an iterable expression. And then you have a do output and an end output. So the end output is for very much like while loops. It's for what happens after the loop has finished. So what is a for loop? So if we take a look at the brief explanation, it's a good starting point. It executes a set of statements a given number of times based on an iterable expression. For example, to iterate through an array and perform some operation on each value. So I'm going to give you a practical example in this video because it will help. Nothing helps explain something more than seeing it in effect. But in essence, as the description there says, for loops are different to while loops in the sense that unlike while loops, which can execute almost infinitely, for loops aren't really about, for loops are usually for looping through something like a group, or looping for a specific set of time, like a set of numbers, like a range from 0 to 5 or something like that. So, as I say, the best way to kind of explain this is to use a practical example. So, let's say we've got these 5 Justins here, okay? And for some reason, there's a script assigned to that one. There you go. You could tell, by the way, if something's got a script assigned to it because it has a scroll above the object. So we have these 5 Justins here. In fact, let's go crazy. Let's fill the whole left to right with Justins. And what I'm going to do is just quickly select each one and just quickly, just forgive me a second just to quickly do this. I'm just going to make it so they don't move. Of course, we could do this with the for loop, but we'll come back to that. I'll show you how to do these kind of things in a for loop because it's actually the sort of thing I would do. But nonetheless, I'll just do it manually first. Okay, so we've got our row of Justins. Okay, and what we're going to do first of all is I'm going to select every single Justin by shift clicking on the Justins until they're all selected. And then I'm going to hit the G key, and this is going to bring up the group panel, the add to group panel, and I'm going to put them in a group called Justins and then say OK. So now I've got a group in my map called Justins, which contains all of those Justins. Okay, so we'll save the map. So let's say we want to write a script where what we want to do is we want to change every single Justin into Sarah, let's say. Okay, so change the model for every single one of these Justins. So we're going to do this with a for loop. So I'm going to again do it in the code, and then I'll show you what it looks like in the visual script afterwards. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a control variable. This can be any text you want, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to say $Justin. I'm going to call it Justin. And then the group is what I created a second ago, Justins. Okay. Now, if you look at going back to the data types video, which was video 2 in this series, where we talked about booleans, strings, numbers, arrays, codexes. If you look at the group data type here, notice how the text is in green and it has square brackets open and closed. Groups are an array, and in this case, the array contains every single Justin that I added to it. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This array goes from 0 to 9, and it goes from 0 to 8, sorry, because there's 9 Justins, but it starts at 0 because the indexes of arrays always start at 0. So group basically contains 0 to 8 because there's 9 Justins. Does that make sense? Okay. So group is currently an array data type. Okay, that's what's in group. An array of that of those characters. So what this for loop is saying is for every Justin in that group, do the following. So what we want to do in this case is set entity model, and we can pass in the control variable, because what is going to be inside this variable is the current Justin of this loop. This will make more sense when I finish the code. So we want to change Justin into the Sarah model. So that's going to set the entity model for that particular entity to the Sarah model. And what we'll do as well is we'll wait 1 second. Okay. So in essence, what this script is going to do is for every Justin in this group, do set the model to Sarah and wait for a second each time. So what's going to happen is it's going to loop for, it's going to set this to the first Justin it grabs in the group. And then it's going to do this to that specific Justin. And then it's going to loop round and it's going to grab the next Justin in the group and put it into that variable. So the second loop round, this will be a different Justin. Okay, but it's the same name, but now the data has changed. So the first loop round, $Justin is going to equal NPC 1. The next time it goes around, it's going to equal NPC 2. Next, it's going to equal NPC 3, NPC 4, NPC 5, NPC 6, 7, 8, and 9. Once it reaches the end, it stops because it runs out of entities. There's no more things in the group. So then the loop will stop, and then we'll have a display message at the end that says all Justins are now Sarah. Okay, and that should close the string like that. Apply and save. That's what our for loop looks like. So the do does all of the entity and wait stuff, and in the end has our message path. So these would be all the things along here that would happen after your for loop. Okay. So let's take a quick look at what this looks like in game. So here we are in game with our row of 9 Justins. So we will execute our script, and we should see each one change after a second delay, and then our message will appear when they've all changed. Yeah. All Justins are now Sarah. The loop is no longer going around because there's no more entities to change. So the for loop stops, and then the rest of the script executes afterwards. Okay. And so that, in essence, is for loops. Now, obviously, there's more you can do with for loops than groups, but generally, that tends to be one of the most useful things to do with for loops in RPG in a Box, is to iterate through things in a group. So we could, for example, this could also be how I would do $Justin dot behavior move area equals all, and now each Justin as it loops through will now be able to walk around the map. I think that's the correct syntax for that. So let's just take a quick look and see if that works. So now what's going to happen is, as well as changing the model to Sarah, it will also allow that particular NPC to now not be immobile anymore. Because remember at the beginning, I set each one to the behavior immobile. So now what I'm doing is I'm looping through each one, undoing that as we go through. So in a minute, when I execute the script, instead of standing here in a line when they're Sarah, they'll now be all moving around. That's the theory anyway. Yeah, and now each Sarah starts to move around in their own AI. And now we've got what was once an orderly line is now completely changed to Sarah and is now in a disarray walking around the map, right? So there's a couple of examples of things you can do with for loops, but essentially what you're doing is you're looping through, in this case, a group, and for every NPC that's in this group, or for every, doesn't even have to be NPCs, it could be a group of tiles, it could be a group of objects. For everything that's in, or entity that's in that group, it's going to, as it loops around each time, it's going to store the current one that it's doing at the moment, that it's grabbed out of that group at the moment, store it in a local variable, and then we can do things with that local variable, like change its behavior or set its model. If it's a NPC, we could just set its name, so we could set each NPC to a name, or we could give it an ID. For example, we might want to give each NPC a unique ID. So we could do $X, just because it can be named anything, equals 0. And then what we can do is for every Justin in the group, we can increment X by 1. So the first time round it's going to be 1. And then we can say $Justin.ID equals, and then we could put in quotes Justin underscore, and then we could use placeholder expression $X. And so basically each for loop, each loop round, is going to give that Justin. The first Justin is going to be Justin underscore 1. The next Justin is going to be Justin underscore 2. The next Justin is going to be Justin underscore 3, etc., etc. And then change its model to Sarah and all of that. However, for loops don't just have to work with groups. They can also use, well, let's take a look. We can look at the visual node to see what sort of things you can do. So you can have groups, you can have range of numbers. So it could be a range of numbers from 0 to 5, for example. We've done the, it could be an array. So going through an array, grabbing all of the things in the array and then printing them all. So for everything in the array, print it one by one. It could be, you know, groups that are attached to an entity. It could be tags that an entity has. So if it has multiple tags, it could for loop through all the tags. Range is useful for, you know, if you want a for loop to only do something a certain amount of times, then if I set the range to from 1 to 5, or let's say 1 to 3, then it's only going to do something 3 times. So the first time, the second time, the third time, and then stop. Okay. Obviously, in this case, Justin isn't going to equal an NPC because this isn't a group anymore. It's not grabbing it's not grabbing what's in the group anymore. It's doing a range. So if you're doing a for loop that has a range, it would typically be because you only want something to execute a certain amount of times, not affect everything in a group, for example. So trying to think of a practical example for when you would use a range. Let's say, for example, you wanted to change the model of only 3 of the Justins. So you could have, trying to think how to do this. For Justin in range 1 to 3, do, and then you would have to grab the ID of that Justin. So let's say, for example, here's a way to do this. Let's say we give this an ID of NPC1. We'll call this one NPC2, and this is NPC3. and we'll leave it at that. Okay, we could obviously give these 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, but we don't need to in this case. So we've given them those IDs. So we go back to our script, x equals 0. So we'll make this EID, because the entity ID is 0. And then for loop num, let's say, in range 1 to 3, we're going to increment EID. So it always starts at 1 to begin with. And then what we want to do is we want set entity model NPC underscore placeholder expression $EID to change to Sarah, and then wait a second, and then we'll have the loop saying 3 Justins are now Sarah. So let's see if that works. So if we execute script 1, okay, so it's actually 1 less. So once it got to the third one, it stopped and said 3 Justins are now Sarah. So we would amend our script to be 1 to 4, because it's not inclusive. But or maybe it is, but I did something wrong, I'm not sure. But you get the idea. What it's basically doing is it's doing it for a particular amount of times, and then once the range is complete, it stops looping around. But what it did while it was looping around is it was incrementing this number and then setting the entity that matched that ID to that model. Okay? And then when it's done, it shows a message. So hopefully that's given a good sort of introductory explanation at the very least of what for loops are for and how they work. If you have any questions on this, obviously feel free to ask on the Discord. But for now, that'll wrap up this video. Thanks for watching.